Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji, and welcome to the next live session of Avid Online. And for those joining us for the first time, a special welcome. Please refer to the chat box for more information on Avid Learning and our platform. Avid Online was launched on the 1st of April 2020 as a direct response to the pandemic. So now we're 16 months young and over 265 programs later. We'd like to say that 2020 and 2021 has challenged us in unprecedented ways. We've managed to stay positive, relevant, engaged, and engaging. We continue to champion and bring to our audiences the best of the arts and culture and stay true to our mantra as always, that learning never stops. I strongly believe in the power of the arts to impact change. And as environmental concerns continue to grow worldwide, we at Avid find it imperative to shed light on such issues and leverage our platform to educate and spread awareness by communicating through the arts. With this curatorial vision, we launched Sustainability Now series last April, a thematized and targeted series of discussions that aim to convert audiences into changemakers and active catalysts and custodians of a greener future. In this series, we have so far presented over 50 changemakers and more than 40 programs and investigated topics such as architecture and urbanism, tourism, technology, museums, fashion, and the future of food, and even an environmental film festival that featured films that were driven by sustainability and environmental consciousness. Please do check out our YouTube channel for our archives. We plan to continue these conversations around wildlife conservation, conscious consumption, and a very special children's book in the coming months. And this brings me to our evening session. Sustainability Now, the future of luxury in India. A panel discussion on the shifting notions and practices of luxury across industries of fashion, lifestyle, branding, ecotourism, and hospitality. Allow me to introduce our changemakers for this evening. Founder, Peepul Consulting, Srimoyi Bhattacharya. Founder, Rare India, Shoba Mohan. Founder, Rewear, Vikram Ramchandani. And they will be in conversation with our moderator for the evening, journalist, author, and podcast host, Gayatri, Rangachari, Shah. For more about our very distinguished speakers, please check out their bios that have been posted in the chat section. Please note this session will last 75 minutes and be followed by a 15-minute Q&A, in which Gayatri will be taking questions submitted by the audience. So do keep them posted. You keep your questions coming throughout the session. On that note, thank you once again for tuning in. Over to you, Gayatri, to level set, and look forward to a fascinating session. Thank you.
Thank you, Asad, and thank you everyone for joining us. I hope one day we'll be able to do this in person, but in the meantime, it's wonderful to see everyone online. I also want to thank the Avid team for being so patient with us, troubleshooting. We actually were meant to do this session of a couple of months ago, but it was in the throes of the worst of the second wave of COVID, so we ended up postponing it. I'm glad we are back together now to talk about a very relevant panel. I wanted to start by acknowledging that today is International Tiger Day, as Shoba pointed out, as well as, of course, the newspapers highlighting it. Quite a special coincidence, given that the animal is endangered. A sighting of this magnificent creature is indeed a luxury, and we are here to discuss sustainability. I've been writing about luxury for a long time. The term was once associated with something that was enormously rare and precious. Nowadays, it's synonymous with conspicuous consumption and great waste. In fact, so ubiquitous is the term that these days luxury means enjoying an experience that money can't buy. A pre-COVID luxury market study from Bain and Company calculated that $3 trillion worth of personal luxury goods have been sold over the past 20 years. That's a lot of material. In 2019 alone, $316 billion of luxury goods were sold around the world. And while the pandemic saw luxury goods sales drop from around 20% globally, just yesterday, BOF reported that Gucci sales are back to pre-pandemic levels, Armani sales are up 34% in the first half of 2021, and brands like Moncler are doing really well. Who doesn't remember images of revenge shopping and the rush of people to stores once lockdowns were eased across the world? I have no doubt that luxury goods sales will soar again. Pundits are describing the next few years as the roaring 20s after all. But as we are all too aware, luxury and sustainability have to go hand in hand because there is no vaccine for climate change. The good news is that not only are we more aware, many companies are starting to take steps to reduce waste and their carbon footprint. We can thank millennials and the young for driving a lot of this change. The landscape for luxury is being reimagined. Second-hand sellers, circular approaches, and conversations around ethically sourced goods are getting increased visibility. Conscious tourism is growing in popularity. Whether it's hotels that are environmentally conscious, buying shoes or clothes made from recycled materials, or buying pre-owned or vintage, people are becoming more open to changing behaviors in order to support the environment. Did you know that about a quarter of true luxury shoppers buy secondhand products? That was a stat that I was not aware of. And none of this was the case a decade ago. After all, if consumers are comfortable buying secondhand cars and electronics, can clothes be the new frontier? Let's look at fashion. According to a recent report by BOF, the global secondhand fashion market is currently worth $130 billion. And about 2.1 trillion of resaleable fashion inventory is lying around in closets across the world. In the US, companies like RealReal, Rebag, and Reflaunt have destigmatized the purchase of pre-loved fashion. In India, Rewear is doing the same thing. Vintage has become cool. Also in India, digital penetration has increased, which has helped to spread the ability to buy pre-loved fashion. And while we don't have hard data, an article earlier this year in The Hindu states that more than 60 Instagram handles are focused on thrifting. The US is leading the way in developing alternatives to materials like leather, which has obviously a very high carbon footprint. It's quite fascinating how plant-based materials are being developed by companies to imagine a more sustainable future. As I was doing some research on this panel, by the way, I just learned that the former head of Hermes has joined the board of a mushroom-based leather startup, MycoWorks. So I think that this particular space is really going to see a lot of uptick in the next few years. In travel and hospitality, something we all long for post-pandemic, things are also changing. We're familiar with hotel room signs saying that they won't change sheets and towels to reduce water wastage unless the guest requests it. Over-tourism, especially in certain cities and countries around the world, is after all a real problem. Again, the good news is that ecotourism is projected to grow from $181 billion in 2019 to $333 billion in the next 20 years. And we, of course, can all play a part in becoming more environmentally friendly travelers. Luckily, we have with us today a very exciting group of practitioners and experts from the Indian luxury space who are aligning luxury with sustainability. Whether it's in fashion, branding, or hospitality, our panelists are changing the way we think about about luxury and sustainability. They're basically trying to marry the two, and we're going to hear more from them on this. And to that end, I'd like to begin by asking each of them to give a brief introduction about themselves and their work. Shri, if we could perhaps start with you.
Hi, Gayatri. Thank you for this amazing introduction and context to our talk. And thank you to the Avid team and Asad for working so hard on bringing all of us together today. I'm Srimoyi Bhattacharya. I run, along with my partners, Shakil, Deepika, and Noor, Peepul Consulting. We are a PR and marketing advisory specialized in luxury and lifestyle, and very excited to be part of this talk today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shri. Then let me bring in Vikram, please.
Hi. So first, thank you, Gayatri. Thank you, Asad, for having me on board. My name is Vikram. I run a company called United Coalition, of which Rewear is a part. And with Rewear, what hope is that people understand and consider used garments through a better lens, and through one where they realize that every product has an innate value. So with Rewear, you buy and sell used Indian designer wear.
Right, great. Shoba?
Hi, Thank you, Gayatri, and thank you, Asad. And as you rightly pointed out, for all this change to be relevant and to go out in the world, I think platforms such as Avid Learning is very, very important. I think that's how the message is carried around. I'm Shoba Mohan. I'm the founder partner at Rewear India, a community of small and medium hotels, which their heart set on sustainability, which is just not about reimagining plastic or just about garbage disposal and things like that. It is a community that believes in conservation at a very, very grassroots level, that also is inclusive of the community and the traveler, believing that all of us have to participate if we want to look at travel as a sustainable model.
Right. Thank you all. Shoba, let me start with you, since you were the last to speak. What is luxury to you within the context of your work, and how do you feel it's being reimagined to become more sustainable?
So, Gayatri, from the time I started work in this field, which is about 20 years ago, luxury has changed has moved several paces. The hardware of luxury is the changeable part. The software of luxury is what I'm more interested in, which is why I'm slightly reticent to call it luxury. Rather, I'd call it style, and a style that matches my style. Low, subtle, and muted. I think I read somewhere that luxury is, this on your face luxury is actually quite vulgar. The thing about luxury that I like and that we try to look at when you look at hotels is that subtlety, the throwbacks to the previous eras, the hospitality that is the time and space of things, the whole idea to be involved and engaged, to have people sit down and have conversation around a large table, exchange ideas. So that is the kind of luxury we try and promote. Of course, the hardware, the service quality, all of that remains. You just can't take that away from, and because again, even if you add sustainability to it, it is not, none of this comes cheap, right? So quality in services are different, but what we actually essentially look at as luxury is that experience, that engagement and involvement of people, rather than a standardized form of luxury. And one of the luxurious things that I like is that I like to be in a place and know that I'm in that place without a standardization around me. Like if I am in Rajasthan, I do want to look out and look in and know that I'm in Rajasthan.
Right. Vikram, what about you? What is luxury to you within the context of your work? And the sustainability bit, I kind of understand, but it's interesting to hear. It'll be interesting to hear from you on what sort of constitutes luxury.
Sure. So luxury for me has always included time. And so in the context of my work, it's time, effort, and skill. And so the craftsmanship that's available within our country, it's wide and varied. And it's a shame that it isn't admired and researched and understood as it should be or deserves to be. And so I feel that luxury today is, keeping this in mind, is in the knowledge of what takes this time, skill, and effort, and understanding that within our clothes, and then wearing it with that sense of pride and knowledge. So the advantage with pre-owned or gently worn clothes today, in India especially, is that we have very intricate and ornate garments, and because of which you can't wear it very often. So the quality of second-hand goods that are part of the festive range of Indian wear is usually in excellent condition, because you're not going to be able to wear lehenga, that's heavy 5 or 6 times. So most people wear it just a few times, 2 or 3 at best. And so you're able to buy something at such discounted value while still carrying forward the heritage and the craft of the craftsmen who built it, as opposed to just letting it lay in a cupboard. So I think luxury in this sense, therefore, is the ability to allow that craft to live and understanding and taking the time to realize what time, skill, and effort went in creating that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, the sustainability part of that is that you're kind of continuing the lifespan of a garment, making sure that it's moving from one set of hands to another. And of course, we'll come back to that. Shri, can I bring you in to answer this question?
So, my definition of luxury is very close to what Vikram spoke about. And I think that one of the things that we are realizing is that the story is really shifting from luxury being defined by international brands to homegrown brands. And that's what I've been finding really exciting. And I think Vikram kind of summed it up. I think it's become really more about what has always been precious in our history and in our legacy. And the fact that we're bringing it all back today, whether it's from bringing back Ayurvedic traditions to, our rich heritage of craft. And we are seeing that the consumer today understands that there is a price to pay for an environmentally friendly, welfare-conscious brand.
Right. So let me ask you, do you think that for a lot of people, especially I think of a particular demographic, the young, I would say, luxury is also got a very negative connotation. Would you agree with that? And if so, based on that, I'd also like to ask you what role branding and public relation plays in shifting consumer attitudes toward luxury.
It's an interesting point you make about how the young zillennials, millennials, however we want to call them now, look at luxury. I actually think that a lot of the latest consumer research that you mentioned are showing that the young generation is very aware of what they're buying, and they're very interested in knowing the provenance and how the product is made. And I think that that's now become part of the cool factor, so much so that the term sustainability, as some of our colleagues in the media have mentioned, is kind of now sort of seen as a given. What is the story, or what is the role that we play in this is really about how we are going to work towards, I don't like the term educate, but how are we going to raise awareness about these aspects of a brand? How do we bring sustainability in the picture? It's going to be in the narrative. And, I was listening to Shoba and Vikram, and that's exactly what they did. They were sharing about the narrative of their engagement, whether it's from a product or from an experiential standpoint. And by the way, that's what luxury is, and what is our function is to be able to accompany some of these brands in that storytelling. What I think has been interesting is the fact that, we've always led our communication or some of our PR planning with the launch of a product, or speaking about a spokesperson, and talking about thought leadership. And now I feel the conversation has changed towards talking about values, which I think is really interesting. But now what we are shifting towards is how do we break down those values? Because the term sustainability has become so overused that what we now need to define is the word itself. So I see a lot of new vocabulary coming in, which I think is very interesting. And I don't know if you picked up on this, but Vikram actually used a term that's been, that I see circulating quite a bit, which is the term considered, and which basically talks about how environmentally conscious a brand is, or where the provenance is, and so what I think is very interesting is to watch how vocabulary is changing to be a far more specific than it was before. Mindful consumption, conscious consumption, they all mean something, and what they mean is that basically we're trying to break down the process for every brand. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting that you talked about that, how sustainability has sort of become this ubiquitous word. In a way, that's what luxury was about 2 decades ago, right? When people suddenly started around the world, economy started growing, and a whole new set of people from around the world started having more disposable income. And so luxury became this all-encompassing thing. And then we've had to unpack that. And similarly now with the word sustainability. But you mentioned Vikram, so I'd like to bring you back in, Vikram, to ask you a little bit about Rewear and what the genesis of that was.
Sure. So we have another company within the group called Payal Khanwala, and with our brand, with Payal Khanwala, we asked ourselves a question a few years ago, which is, there's all this speak about sustainability, and I think sustainability is the dirty word and not luxury, because it's been bastardized to such great extent that it's part of marketing lingo. And we said, okay, if we have to do something that is, environmentally and socially conscious, then how do we participate? And because we, within Payal Khanwala, are making clothes, and we're making new clothes for people to buy, it goes against the ideology of truly being sustainable, because no brand can really be sustainable if you're producing and trying to get quarter over quarter growth. It's, you're using new material. So we said, okay, let's look at the current inventory landscape. And we realized that there's tremendous amount of inventory lying in women's closets. And because of this derivative of our clothes being heavy and whatnot, so the derivative was that you're not going to be able to wear them often. And what do you do with it? You can't really just give away expensive garments. So what happens? And there wasn't a system in place, one that would help authenticate it and one that would help give it some sort of value. Because when we do buy a garment, or when we buy a car rather, we assume that we can sell it for X amount, let's say 50% after a few years, right? We don't think about clothes in that manner. But I think we should. And so that dialogue and those conversations led to us creating Rewear as a separate entity, where we would help individuals consign and purchase garments that either they wouldn't have had the opportunity to buy otherwise, or they might find some hidden jewels within the Rewear system or platform.
Right, and of course, it's a huge market to be tapped into. As I said in the introduction, $2.1 trillion worth of inventory lying in people's closets. So that's a big. And if we can make that happen in a country like India, where, as you said, we have a lot of occasion wear around the festive season and the wedding season, why not? Shoba, I'd like to bring you in now to ask you about hospitality and what consumer shifts you're seeing in the sector. Are you seeing, obviously you will get a subset of people who are environmentally conscious because that's the work you do, but even broadly speaking, with your expertise in the hospitality sector, do you see consumers now becoming more conscious of the type of choices they make in selecting their travel itineraries based on the impact that might have on the environment?
This whole conversation around sustainable travel actually kind of got to a head somewhere in 2012, between 2012 and 2014. Till then, everybody was talking about experience. Experience is the new luxury, the storytelling and things like that. But even at that point in time, hotels were sold as big rooms, this is the view, 9-inch snoozer mattress, and you had those huge televisions, and then the curved televisions came in, and the blinds that can be pulled down with your mobile phones or your iPad. So even till 2014-15, that still was that is how you explained luxury in a hotel, which means you don't need to move a finger. that is also the time when the awareness in the world started. I mean, all this movement, climate change started getting started getting louder. There were conversations happening across industries, and I'm just not talking about travel. People were talking. In fact, schools started. I used to accompany school groups, and I remember whenever the children were taken, they would get them to see, factories, or they would take them to see places where sustainability was in practice. Around this time also, till that time, this whole sustainability part, which was always a part DNA for Rare, even from the time they began, because they were all small, owner run. Most of our large owners were conservationists. They believed in a few things. It was always there, but it was still a side story. It was around 2015 it became like our main story. We kind of put it up center. But did the industry or travelers start to look at travel from the lens of sustainability? Not really. Not in that sense. I mean, there would be some people. In fact, children brought sustainability and awareness about environment home to them. I mean, it's the same thing happened to us. My kids went to Sri Ram school, and 1997, say no to plastic, say no to crackers. This is what they brought into the house. And, we all kind of, we really took on to it. And then Rare also was formed around the same time. But in the pandemic, what happened is that the industry has time to listen to this, these conversations, these words that are happening. So I think I can safely say that the level of awareness has increased. Are they really looking at hotels, and are they looking at the attributes a hotel has to see whether it is involving the local community, it is getting organic food, our farm to table experience is a part of it? What are they doing with their garbage? What is their water consumption? How are they energy efficient? All of these things. Are they checking these things before they are taking a trip? Not really. Not really. I mean, especially in the Indian context, I can tell you. But one thing that they know, that because safety has become, and smallness and remoteness has become so important, and which kind of automatically, rolls into the whole sustainable thing. Small keys, remote areas, no over tourism. It kind of rolls into the same idea. That is why you see a larger perception of hotel interest for hotels such as the Rare hotels. So I'm not really, thrilled at the numbers that are looking at. Are they exploring hotels from the lens of sustainability? Not really. But there is a heightened awareness.
But I would imagine, we've all done it ourselves, shared photos of like the beautiful sky when there was no traffic, and, the clean air that all our cities experienced when we came to a grinding halt. And obviously there's been so much chatter and discussion around this. I would imagine that you brought up the point of safety, but I would also imagine that now with this heightened awareness of just how lovely things can be, if you try to be, more sustainable, that perhaps that shift would happen, and people might actually start to think about making choices in the kinds of places they visit and the places that they stay at. Because of the kind of lower environmental impact they would have.
Not to such an extent, Gayatri, really. I mean, if you take notice of the rush into the hills and the chaos they are causing from feeder markets going into 6-hour, 7-hour drives from Delhi, Mumbai, and things like that, you will know that this is. Let me not be negative here. I'm saying it is working. There is a heightened awareness, but India is also a large traveling population. It is also not a very evolved population. Yes, and if you cut them up in layers, maybe the low-hanging fruit are people who are already talking about this. For instance, Shri and Vikram would probably be very, very conscious about it, and you would be probably. But there is a whole lot of other people who are also travelers, who will pick up their car and just ride out to the mountains there, who are there, one of the first things they will ask, especially when the pandemic was on, they ask, do you serve bottled water? A lot of my hotels don't serve bottled water. And they would say, sorry, hame to bottled water chahiye. They would say, we would say, we swimming pools are, the pools are not used, but are not in use. But in case you want, this to use the swimming pool, in case it's a buyout, I mean, that's yours is the only family or a group that's there, you can use the swimming pool. They'll ask you to empty out swimming pools. So that is also there. That's because of the fear the pandemic has caused about, about the whole scenario. So yes, there is awareness. I mean, there is heightened awareness. So if you were at 10, you're all there. If you were at 8, you probably move to 9. If you are at 4, you move to 5. So it'll probably go, and change takes a lot of time. And don't forget, sustainable hotels are not cheap hotels, right? And so there is also a money component in it. And one of the things people generally ask me, so you mean I'll slum it out? I said, no, you don't need to slum it out. They're very, very comfortable. But, these are some of the things that you have to follow.
Right.
But yes, there is a heightened awareness.
Vikram, I wanted to bring you in because you, of course, are dealing with this through a company that you founded, which probably is a pioneer in terms of, pre-loved or, gently worn clothing. How have consumers responded to Rewear? Have you seen an uptick? Has it been a struggle? We obviously come from a culture of recycling. Normally it's passed down through generations or within the family, etc. But how are our attitudes towards recycling and buying into pre-loved fashion changing?
Good question. I think first we need to put into context that our culture and our country is very different from what we read about in the West and, trends and patterns in either the States or Europe. And even within India, which almost works like a continent because the culture is so different in the North vis-a-vis the South. It's been a pretty sharp learning curve for us. Consumers have been receptive, but I don't think the trigger has had anything to do with being conscious of their consumption. It's because the products are cheap. And there is very little overlap between those that consign their garments with us and those that purchase these garments. And so the ones that end up purchasing are looking for the cheapest possible deal, and it's an alternative in some way to buying a knockoff of a Sabyasachi, where you can get the original for a lot cheaper, even though it's a few seasons prior, right? The consigners are not particularly doing it for the money. They're doing it to make space in their closets, and because of the sort of structure and system we have in place, where if you consign your garment, you can get paid via a voucher that you say use for Ogan. So there is no cash transaction that takes place, right? So if you've bought it in a particular medium, you can still use the money. So for them, it works like credits almost, that I'll give away 5 clothes, I'll get something that's new.
Oh, sorry. So let me understand this, just also for our audience. So the way Rewear works is, let's say I give you a sari, whatever, Payal Khandwala sari, let's say. You will give me, obviously I'm consigning it to you. It's not as though when it gets sold, I'll get something. You're giving a voucher to, no.
That's not entirely true. So there are 3 options for payments. The first is you get money into your bank account, which is traditional. The second is you can keep the money on Rewear, and then you get a bit more because you will consume the monies with us. The third is if you don't want money in your bank account or you don't want to keep money with Rewear, we have a bunch of partner stores. So we've got Collage in Madras, we've got Ogan, we've got Elan, a whole bunch of them, right? So you can get a voucher for that store.
Oh, understood. Okay. Sorry, so I interrupted you, but just carry on with.
So I think the audience are coming to Rewear for slightly different reasons, and the reason why we run Rewear has a different motive. But nonetheless, as long as transactions are happening and people are starting to be comfortable with this mode of consumption, it's better overall,
Right.
is what we feel. And so we're still continuing to navigate through the Indian market and understand the nuances, and we're learning as we go.
Right. And how old is Rewear? When did you found it?
So Rewear would be a little over 2.5 years.
Shri, I'd like to bring you in now because, of course, you represent some major clients in the fashion space. Of course, you represent clients across various industries, but specifically with regard to fashion. What do you, and some of them, of course, are known for their sustainability, etc. I'm thinking of Good Earth in particular. How can brands encourage timelessness? How do you, what kind of trends are you seeing in with regard to sustainable fashion? Because as Vikram pointed out earlier, it's a bit of a conundrum, right? And this is the fundamental problem with sustainability and fashion. You have to sell more, but and you have to keep producing. And at the same time, we're getting these signals that we should not be consuming so much as consumers. So it's like, it's sort of this chicken and egg thing.
I think Gayatri, as a shopper myself, I think the idea is that we don't try to justify the consumption. It has to be ingrained in us, and I can see that for Vikram, it's going to be an interesting journey. Because the conversation around vintage or secondhand or thrift is a new conversation in India. So look, I'm thinking that at this stage, I'd love for Aisha to help me out and share a few slides that I wanted to share with you to illustrate some of the points that I wanted to make. What we are seeing is that, first of all of this conversation is obviously directed by the consumer to a certain extent, and what we are seeing is that the consumer is interested in brands that, again, are evocative in some way, or just touch a chord in some perspective. And what that chord is really depends from sort of category to category. It could be about revival, it could be about connecting back to your tradition, or it could be about the message of mindful consumption. And so what I'm going to try and do is to just share with you a few quick case studies to illustrate my points, because I just find that far more tangible as an example. So I thought I'd start with, the first thing, which is to talk a little bit about brands that have looked at revival in some way in terms of bringing back some of the traditional, the traditions that we have. So Lukwani Hemant, which is, I consider a niche brand in India with very, very strong roots in couture. The founders are Didier Lukwani and Hemant Sagar, who are, global citizens, so to say, with roots in France and in Germany and in India. They established a house where the ready-to-wear line also encourages, obviously, investments in classics rather than buying pieces on trend, and thereby creating a certain way of looking at, reducing the concept of fast fashion products, which is absolutely the antithesis of what they are doing. So what they went ahead and did is that they created this concept of Ayurganic, which, as the name suggests, brings together Ayurveda and organic fabric, which are all GOTS certified and from Gujarat, by the way. And so, interestingly, the fabric reaches Kerala, is treated with herbs there, and then macerated and then rinsed in a sweetwater river before it goes to Gurgaon, and then goes there for cutting and tailoring before it reaches the consumer. So again, this is all about how you bring together the concept of nature, nurture, and how have we educated, because, well, that goes back to my topic. We decided to take a set of press champions to Kerala for them to actually experience the whole process. So I think for us, what is very interesting is to really try and connect the consumer to the process, but the part that will appeal to them. And while I'm on the topic of Ayurveda, I want to talk about Kama Ayurveda, which is also another dear client, as they've also stood out in the space of reviving ancient traditions through very strict R&D and their philosophy. And again, this goes back to the whole idea of believing in a philosophy and knowing how to convey it, right? And again, they've understood the powers of reviving this aspect and created a beautiful collection of Ayurvedic treatments, again, which is about a holistic form of wellness. I won't develop too much on that because I understand that this is another topic for Avid. And I want to move on to a brand that you mentioned and which is very dear to us, which is Good Earth, which again, from its inception, really held fast to the idea of sustainability at the very core of their business, as you very rightly mentioned, Gayatri. And I know you know the brand well, so you know how consistently they work towards, production of goods that are not only environmentally friendly, but also produced with care towards, history and legacy. It's about India going back to their roots of rediscovering, incorporating khadi, linen, vegetable dyes. And again, it's about being conscious of not only quality, but products that will last for a lifetime. And their latest brand, their latest brainchild is Flow, which speaks directly to this growing market of conscious consumers looking to shop from limited edition collections, again at very thoughtful price points. So I think it's all about how you celebrate this mindful consumption, and how you work with craft clusters in India, and how you communicate that. For some people, it might be about talking about the fabric. For some, it might be about the design. But it's really, at the end of the day, it's all about upholding that traditional knowledge and using locally sourced raw materials. And I thought that two brands were really, in many ways, a reflection of that. I also want to talk to you a little bit about technology, because I think that plays a huge role in making process transparent, which is what we've really like to communicate on with a new brand that we work with, which is called Aranyani. And what they've done is that they've developed a QR code for every purchase for people to be able to follow the QR code and get a sense of the process of the making of the bag, including who will be making the bag, who will be making the product itself.
And so, Shri, with that QR code, you get to see who's making the product, and then I presume, does the person who's eventually buying it also get to see like the product going through every single stage of its iteration? Is that the point?
And that's exactly the idea behind it, is that the founder of the brand really wanted to make sure that he was able to actually showcase the philosophy of sustainability, and taking the customer through the process was their way of doing it. And then similarly, earlier this year, I'm just moving on to now another example. And I wanted to talk, and this goes back to something that Vikram was discussing. We all know Tarun Tahiliani for his beautiful bridal wear, but they also proceeded to launch a campaign called Love Relove that focused on pairing older ensembles with newer designs and promoting the idea of restyling older clothes in one's wardrobe to fit a more modern aesthetic. But really, the idea behind this was really about how do you promote restyling. How do you promote reusage? Again, with this whole philosophy of conscious consumption, frankly. So I thought I would just walk you through these examples to give you a sense of narratives that we've been developing for our clients. What is the common thread? The common thread is really about transparency, right? It's great to talk about sustainability, but we're also very mindful about, not newsjacking in any way, as we say, and not to just use the term for the sake of it, but really to find ways to illustrate it. And what I think, Sorry?
I think that it's really. I think what's really is something that's happening a lot is that brands, companies are becoming aware of the fact that consumers like to know, are increasingly wanting to know where their goods are coming from, whether it's the food that you're eating or the clothes that you're wearing. No, of course, there's a huge market for fast fashion, and there will continue to be. But for a certain type of consumer, they like to know sort of all the back end stuff as well.
And Gayatri, that's a tremendous shift across the board, even from our function standpoint. I remember, 10 years ago when we pitch about a luxury brand and say, can we, take you to the factory, in Italy? An editor would say, darling, frankly, we don't really care about how a bag is made, But today that conversation has completely changed, and they want to know how that bag is made. Yeah. So I'm delighted to see that it's all become about the making of and the behind the scenes, and not only about the glitz and glamour,
Right. Shoba, I'd like to bring you in actually, because it's very interesting. Sri has shared some examples of brands where, that are sort of much more conscious of, some of the brands that she works with that are very conscious of this issue around sustainability. In your, what about sort of in terms of, from your perspective, some shining examples of sustainable luxury tourism or hospitality that you've come across that you could share with us? And, also the kind of criteria that you use at Rewear, because that's, I think, something the audience may not know about in terms of selecting and shortlisting hotels and experiences from your point of view. How do you come up with that criteria?
Yeah. So first, I'd like to talk about the criteria. See, sustainability, of course, just like Sri and Vikram said, there are a lot of these words being, it's just not sustainability. There's responsible tourism, there is ecotourism, there is now regenerative travel. There's all kinds of words that are being bandied about. And really, you really want to know what does each one of them means. In my opinion, the most singular thing is that if you can't be somebody who lives just any way you want, and then just when you want to travel, you'll become a responsible traveler. That doesn't happen. You need to become conscious world citizen first. You need to be conscious of what you're consuming on a day-to-day basis. And once you get there, that awareness comes into you, then everything, whether it's clothing or the travel or the car you buy, then it kind of gets into everything. Otherwise, till then, it's just a fad. Somebody said this, so I'm going to do this. So I just want to put it out there that responsible travel, sustainable travel, clothing, whatever it is, it has to come from your understanding and your belief that you can make a change and you have the choice to make that change, the shift to a more responsible living. Only then there is this whole conversation around whether it is travel or it is clothing or something like that occurs. I'd like Aisha to put out my presentation. Thanks, Aisha. So this is who we are. It is a community of owner-led. Now, owner-led is very important because when the owner is there, the control, and it is his views, it is his beliefs, it is his concept and his ideas about sustainability, about what he wants to do, the experience that he wants to give out. That man, standalone is the other important thing. And then the location that they choose, right? Most of them are standalone properties. Most of the Rewear hotels, 80% of them are really out in areas where, sorry, did you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to say, so are you just would not consider a chain? Or is it...
In general, we don't do, even if we do chains, we have boutique chains that come in and we will probably take one or two hotels in them, not take the entire, because they do come with one hotel and then the brand actually grows. Sometimes what they do, they kind of collate similar hotels in the 6-8 room category and they make it into a group. But in general, we like the standalone things, and there also then the changes that happen. So this is very important. And then the experiences that are there is again a very important fact. The other thing I wanted to tell you is that there has been no coding. Luxury has a coding, the color, the gold and this, and the luxury has a coding, but sustainability actually in travel it's a very wide thing. So it didn't have a coding. One of the things that we did in our narrations, and Sri pointed out that it has to get into your narrative, and even a traveler need to know what is he thinking about. When you tell him you're a responsible traveler, what is he supposed to be looking at? Aisha, the next slide, please. So this is a kind of a coding we kind of created for our hotels. So what is their attitude towards plastic? I mean, it's very difficult to be zero plastic because our supply chains still are not efficient that way. What is their attitude towards water? Now, the water that they conserve from rain and things like that, and also their wastewater, their grey water. What is the chemicals that they put back into it? Wildlife and nature conservation, where will they place their wildlife lodge? I mean, if usually they say if this is one important gate, so everybody will make a beeline to that particular gate. You have to remember that any destination first and foremost belongs to the residents of that destination. It doesn't belong to the traveler. He is still a guest. So in an ideal world, a good tourism product, a sustainable, good, and a conscious tourism product will first and foremost retain the pristine and the authenticity of a destination, and it should contribute to the residents. It should not harm the residents. It should create positive impact for the residents or the community there. So these are two very important things. So people and planet for social and environment thing. So low impact tourism. Will you stay in one place and drive people for 2 to 3 hours to go and see something, or will you create opportunities for them to explore around? That is sensitive, discovering the area sensitivity. Heritage conservation is a big piece, because there's the architecture, of course. Then there is also everything that is associated with that architecture, the textile that is in the area, all of that which kind of constitutes the intangible heritage gets attached to this whole heritage piece. Energy efficiency. I mean, you can say a 70-room hotel or a 100-room hotel does energy efficient, and but it can't. I mean, compare this against a 20-room hotel. How does a 100-room hotel talk about energy efficiency? Of course, they will work on those things, but that's the point. The smaller the hotel, the more energy efficient. The closer the hotel, the more energy efficient it is. How is the local community engaged? Does your tourism product even impact them positively? Does it create livelihood? Does it use their skills? If there's a carpenter, will you be getting your products from somewhere because of price points, or will use that carpenter to create products in your hotel? So that is the other thing. And what do you do with your garbage? So all of this it's like about 10 points, including the human touch, which again was a pandemic response to say, how are these people treated? When people started talking about community engagement in tourism, what is the salaries that they are paid? Some of them are from the tribal communities. They just don't even. So going into these to audit, I mean, we are not an auditing agency, but there are several companies that are now looking into proper audit into this. So these are some of the points that we look into. And of course, beyond this is the story, the conceptual value. How do they define the destination? I mean, you don't want a hotel that looks the same everywhere, that when you wake up, of course, you know where the TV is, you know where the door is, and when you know where the bathroom is, but it has no connection to the destination at all. So that is the kind of things that we do. And in the next slide, what we are urging in our narratives to travelers is to start to explore differently, ask different questions. That legend at the bottom tells you that that's Glenburn Tea Estate in Darjeeling. It's a 8-suite hotel in a 1,500-acre Darjeeling tea estate. And Sarai Victoria, again, is near Panna National Park. Again, 8 cottages made with local materials. This does 2 things, and that's very interesting. Why it is not very easy, or it's very difficult to find manpower to do this kind of this kind of rammed mud construction, which is local architecture. But why did they do it? Because they did not want the local people who work with them and who are around the villages around them to kind of feel out of place in the place that they were working. So it's very internal. It is led by the owners. It's a very thought-provoking, and it's a continuous journey. None of the rare hotels I think will come up and put out their hand and say that I'm all there. They'll tell you, well, it's a journey. We are still growing. We are working on this and we're working on that. But just putting out these points to say, these are the points you would be looking at. If you're truly wanting to travel responsibly, these are some of the points that you will be asking. These are the questions you'll be asking before you travel.
I mean, I think this is remarkable, and obviously we should all be looking at this kind of good housekeeping seal of approval, the rare kind of chapa, if you will. But Shoba, in order for this to really become a movement and for things to be transformative, don't we need scale? So it's wonderful that there are these 8-room hotels and all of that, but how do we, as you said earlier yourself, India is a country on the move. I mean, hopefully will be also after the pandemic, and certainly was pre-pandemic, and you have these masses of travelers. So, I mean, these examples you've cited are amazing, but don't we need sort of much more in terms of scale in order to be able to have much more, to have sustainable tourism?
Yeah, great question. And like I always said, you don't want 100 people doing sustainability perfectly. You want the entire population of 7.3 billion doing it. I mean, just getting after it. So, like I said, because the conversation is so, because the conversation is all out there, everybody is talking about it. I can tell you that everybody worth his salt in tourism and hospitality is doing some form of sustainability. They are looking at their plastic consumption. So I'm not saying that they're all there. I mean, even our hotels are not. I mean, they come on board with just 4+. Right. Of course, then the style, the concept, the uniqueness, the story of the owner, all of this kind of adds value to the whole product, which is a rare hotel. But there are everybody, whether he's doing, I mean, in fact, when there is, I mean, one of the things that I've learned is there is no sustainability shaming. I mean, people will get, and if there's one hotel in a community that is doing, people pick up and they start to learn, and they kind of lead that whole movement over there. So it has to be a big movement, and everybody has to start doing whatever they can. Like, I mean, we live in communities. I do composting. I compost my own wet waste, but not everybody does it. But, somebody comes and asks me, oh, where did you get it? So this is how the movement has, which is why the logo we have is a ginkgo biloba, which is called maidenhair tree. And ginkgo, it started in, and we moved, when we rebranded ourselves, this is the symbol that we used, because sustainability, to become, like you said, to reach out to masses and to reach out to a whole lot of people, it has to be moved from people to people. That's how the ginkgo tree from the east went all over, and you can find it in New York, you can find it in Kashmir, Manali, you can find it in the Oxford Street. I've seen it in some of the gardens in France. So this is how it goes by, from people to people, and that's the movement you're seeing. Everybody's talking about it.
I like that you said there's no sustainability shaming. I think that's important to kind of keep in mind. Vikram, I'd like to bring you in and just sort of talk about a little bit about the pandemic, and how and if that has impacted the way people approach vintage and pre-loved fashion. Has that been an issue at all? Do you see it becoming an issue, because of the safety and hygiene component of, let's say, clothes that don't belong to you in the first place?
Sure. But just before that, I want to highlight a very important point that Shoba brought up, which is to say that to talk about sustainability or to talk about being conscious, it has to be innate. It has to come from within. It's how you eat, how you shower, how much toilet paper you use. It's every single thing. If you're thinking about it holistically, you will automatically gravitate towards things that use fewer resources. And so you don't leave a trail behind. So when you travel, you're not throwing that packet of Lay's outside the window and then wearing something that you think is sustainable. It doesn't work that way. It has to come from within, and it has to be holistic. The pandemic hasn't really been kind to secondhand fashion within India, predominantly because people started to be a little wary of the condition, and that's a stigma that we're trying to break, to disassociate secondhand from dirty. They're two very different things.
Yeah.
Just because something is secondhand, we as people are secondhand. I mean, how many of us have only been in one relationship? We're all secondhand by nature, right? So it's important to disassociate secondhand from dirty. And we've been very mindful of ensuring that when the garment goes to a new individual, it goes as though it were brand new, from the dry cleaning to the packaging to everything else, right? And we're very proud of the processes that we employ. But because it's so new as a thought or an idea or concept within the country, and because we don't have this culture of vintage barn finds and vintage finds like we do in more developed nations, perhaps, it's very hard for someone to digest that they're getting something that may be used and still having to pay for it, and at some point paying more than what they would if they were to buy something on sale. Which leads me to the second point. During the pandemic, there were numerous sales because everyone was sitting on stock. So everything was discounted. And so the comparison really was in a lot of consumers' minds as to whether we get something that's 50% or 70% off from the designer and it's in season and it's brand new, vis-a-vis getting something that was originally more expensive and maybe from a higher marquee designer for cheaper. And so that sort of conundrum also played out. So between being unsure about the hygiene and the pricing, it wasn't a very enjoyable ride. But it's been better.
Yeah. Do you see things changing though?
I do see things changing. So the delta for us is, not as steep as it is for designer brands. So within our portfolio as well, we see how the branded company is doing better in general on a percentage basis. But it is getting better, and we're here. I mean, we set up Rewear not to be really profit hungry in that sense. So we are happy to kind of wait it out and also pause. And we want to be around and allow people to know that this is an alternative. It is an option.
Right. Shri, what about you? In terms of the pandemic, have your clients sort of really started to re-look at sustainability or think about how, the story, how they communicate, the way they sort of talk to you about how they want to position themselves? Has that become more top of mind?
It definitely has, Gayatri. And I think that what it did is exactly what I started our discussion with, is that the whole conversation shifted from a product conversation. People didn't want to start selling and actively having a commercial conversation anymore, because our brands knew that the consumer was not listening. People were not in a zone to buy largely beauty products and so on and so forth, except for that one or two red lipstick. And I think what was interesting is that the conversation shifted at that point, also because our brands realized that it would sound tone deaf to continue trying to launch a product. And I want to take the example of Karma because it's top of my mind right now. They decided to completely shift and talk about what they believe in and their values, which is, meditation, yoga, and it all became about giving tips online, to handle your day, and talk about wellness and well-being rather than a product. And I think that, a lot of the brands that we work with realized that and started looking at how they would change the conversation. And some of the fashion brands that we work with, like AMPM, for instance, again, it all became about how do we talk about mindful consumption, rather than, keep selling a new collection.
Right. So I want to ask all of you, I'm going to throw it out to the audience shortly, but just sort of an overall philosophical question, because this is, again, the big conundrum, right? Do you feel we all need to consume less, and how do we reconcile that with the need to grow and develop an economy, to give the craftspeople more work, to make sure the hospitality industry continues to thrive and grow because it's a major employer? How do we kind of marry these two fundamental dichotomies, these two pulling in different directions. I'll let any of you sort of begin, whoever wants to take it first.
I'll just share what I have, in my heart. I think, look, I think it's very important at this stage to support young businesses, and while we talk about sustainability, I think it goes with the philosophy of sustainability to be supportive of sustaining young labels, and I think everyone's worked hard to make business far more personal. And I see a lot of value in that. And I think that that's one of the shifts that's happened in the pandemic, is that a handwritten note, a personal call, a little card to personalize a product or a gift has made a huge difference. And I see that that's maybe a shift that we will keep post, any of the current circumstances.
Shoba?
Yeah, go ahead, Vikram, after you.
Oh, okay. So back to what I had mentioned earlier as well. I think consumption needs to be thought about. It needs to be slightly more conscious, and I know this word has been thrown around, but we have more than we need in general, and there is more out there than we would ever require. Whether it's businesses, and today there are no barriers to set up a business. There are lots of small brands, there are lots of brands in general for almost anything you can think of. But as consumers, we need to first question what it is that we want, if it is a product, if it's something that we truly enjoy, and if we can take care of it over time, however small it may be, whether it's an eraser or a motor vehicle. And I think that's a good way to start. It's something that we've been trying to practice as a family as well. It's not easy, but over time, we feel less burden. We feel less weight on our shoulders with less things weighing us down. So that's my personal philosophical view.
Shoba?
Yeah, so it's something I struggle with, really. I mean, I must say, but even travel, for instance, you do burn fossil fuels to go anywhere. So the whole conversation around making it. But do the ill effects of travel support the development attributes, the transformational and mindful engagement? All of this, does it balance the ill effects of this whole travel bit that you've done again in the pandemic, just so that we are concentrating on the domestic market rather than, there was a time when a lot of our hotels, over 80% of the hotels, were only interested in the inbound market, right? Now that, it's a more sustaining market, it's an all year round market, so we are like concentrating in. When you talk about personally, I think we do. I mean, I still think I consume a lot. I say, if you break up my house, I think you can make 4 houses with it. It is just too much stuff that we have. And on one side, and on the other side, I think we are too many people. I mean, we are just 3 times what we were about 50, 60, 70 years ago. I mean, all over. So this whole thing about, I think we personally define what is enough for us. And I think that is where I would be looking at. I always believe that this whole sustainability bit is very simple. It's awareness. You need to be aware of what's going on. Once you're waken up, you can't put him back to sleep. Once you're aware, and believe that each one of us can make a difference and make a change, I don't think you can ever make wrong choices. And it's always a progression to the next level, to the next level, and the next level. And so, no, I'm not very happy with what I'm doing with stuff. But in the last 2 years, I think I have bought less. In fact, I've not bought anything at all, right? So That's good, and which is something almost everyone says, that I haven't I have a 88 year old friend who tells me that if I can't eat it, drink it, or read it, I don't want it. And it's like a mantra to me. So I also say this: if I can't drink it, eat it, or read it, which now of course you can read it online, you just don't want it. So I think it's a personal whether it's business or it's your personal life or lifestyle, where you want to put that stop, where you want to say this is enough for me. I think that's a very, very personal choice.
Economists would be aghast at that, because as I studied economics in college, and so they always say the C has to go up in order for the economy to be boosted. So consumer spending and consumer sentiment has to be on the rise. But I totally understand where you're coming from. I mean, I grew up in India, where conspicuous consumption was sort of really not encouraged. It was something that was looked down upon. The weddings were so much simpler. And nowadays it's like, a whole new level. So
I don't know when this weddings went into hotels. We were all married. I mean, our weddings used to happen in homes. I mean, I wonder.
Yeah. And I think that's why shows like Mary Kondo, if anybody's familiar with that show that she does, is The Purging. I think a lot of people cleaned out their closets, and we still are very much a recycling culture. So that's good. I hope we retain that as we continue to evolve as an economy. But
in fact, it's very interesting you say that. By nature, our traditions, in fact, if you go into our philosophies, our traditions and things like that, thrift is some thrift, keeping clean, giving away, and keeping, it is a part of our upbringing in the olden days. I mean, it's also, when you look into our Upanishads and things like that, they keep talking about garbage, and how if you have a dirty house, or the Alakshmi will come into the house. So all of this is actually it's very easy to to move back into our traditional systems and bring it all back, and probably we'll understand it better, to protect our environment.
India is the only country where you'll still find mochis, who'll fix your shoes, or
kabadi walas. I mean,
repair your iPhone or whatever it is, and I think it's amazing.
Kabadi walas, I mean, and those recycling people, they would come and they would take your saris and give you 2 bartans and things like that. I mean, all of that is gone. I mean, sorry.
Well, now let me open it up. Let me just open up the Q&A box and just scroll through some of these questions. Just bear with me as I just read them. So here's a question. Many people are not aware in small towns and cities and still think other people's clothes are dirty to wear. I guess, Vikram, this could be for you, or recycling leftover fabrics are waste. What to do about such thinking?
You have to change it, and you have to educate them. And we're doing that slowly. And I think there are many individuals today who are advocates of, secondhand clothing. And there are many individuals who are utilizing old fabrics to create something new out of it. I'm very hopeful for the young and new generation who have this embedded in their education system in terms of being ecologically minded, where they are taking action. So I think we'll see a lot of change over the next decade or so.
Yeah, I think that, to your point, I know that people are working with all sorts of discarded, fabrics, waste fabrics, all of that. I think that there's a lot of potential in that area. And I think as people find that those garments look cool and, are sort of considered fashionable, then they'll automatically gravitate towards them. Shoba, are there any common links between sustainable tourism and recycled fashion within the purview of luxury? For example, travel and tourism expose people to sustainable luxury fashion practices across India and the globe. I guess if you travel, you're more exposed, and so.
Yeah, and also dyeing crafts, dyeing textiles, these are all of these things come into fore. And I already said how heritage plays a very important part in the whole sustainable things. I mean, some of the crafts that are dying away. I mean, in a place called Shapura Bagh in Rajasthan, the fur painters, the last family is there, and it is travel. And somebody who was traveling to that area, we have a beautiful hotel there called Shapura Bagh. It's when they traveled there, they saw the art of fur painting. The Joshis is the last family doing there, brought it back into a contemporary use. I mean, and there are a huge number of examples of how, all the old traditional textiles are being bought. They're textile travel. I mean, people actually travel to understand old handlooms and things like that across the country. So I think that is a big part of sustainability. You can't, and fashion, of course, you can't discount.
Yeah. Shri, I'm going to lob the next two questions at you. One is it possible to disassociate luxury from high price? I think that's a very good question. And then tell us about brand campaigns that are aimed at spreading awareness about environmental issues while looking to, basically, if you can give an example of a specific brand that is doing that.
So on the first question, look, I think that's a hard one. Exclusivity is built through multiple aspects, but I'm very tempted to be counterintuitive and to share with you that I actually think that luxury is really about how rare a product is. And, since we were talking about recycling, while all of you were discussing, clothing, I was thinking about my mother's kanthas and how they are made, some of her old Banarasi sari. And to me, that's luxury, but these are not very expensive pieces. Look at what goes into it is the labor of making the kantha, right? And so I'm very tempted to share with you that I don't think that pricing really is relevant to the term luxury. It's really about how you look at it and what is luxury for you. Sorry, I was just clever about answering.
And any brand campaigns aimed at spreading awareness about environmental issues that you could maybe cite?
So look, for the brands that we work with, I can't really think of anyone that would have been specifically talking about environment per se, but they all talk about mindful consumption, and I want to tell you that I think it all goes back to breaking it down. What the provenance is and how you treat the environment to get the product done, and which is basically most of the brands that we work with in the fashion space. Some of them talk about it explicitly, some of them don't. But what's the formula to it? I really think that the formula to it is transparency and being authentic in your voice, that none of it sounds forced or that it doesn't sound like you're talking down to your consumer. So it's really more about embarking your consumer in that journey and sharing with them your narrative.
Right. We got a question here from Veronique, which I really like. So she talks about sustainability being now and not having any other option. It can't only be a concept. Lots of people don't know what it means practically. So when we see somebody like a Bezos or a Branson going for spatial tourism, are people aware of that kind of carbon footprint? And what kind of changes can we? So I mean, I guess the question is really like, you've got like these super rich men who are going into space for like 11 minutes. And then here we are talking about sustainability on planet Earth. So Shoba, how would you respond to something like that?
Sorry, would you repeat that? I was actually busy typing something out. Sorry.
Oh, okay. No, so the question is, and actually, I mean, anyone could, but I lobbed it to you because of the hospitality nature of the question. The point about the, sustainability being very much a pressing issue today. It's not something that we can think about in the future. It's urgent, but at the same time, we see, men like Bezos and Branson going into space for all of 11 minutes. And of course, that's being lauded and so in many quarters, but it has an enormous carbon footprint itself. So how do we kind of, make this change in sustainability, make it much more pressing? And the question was specifically in India, but I actually think it's a global issue.
Yeah, see, the thing is, there will be all kinds of people in the world. Again, I said there was a time when I used to say, oh, you do this and we do this, my hotels, but that's no longer the case. The thing is, what I don't believe in, and if there are more people who don't believe in what Bezos is doing and going, we will not even highlight it. It is news, right? What if the entire media industry said we don't agree with it, and they did not highlight it at all? And it was a sad small news somewhere for whatever research, whatever reason that they are going. But that's not the case, which everybody wants to listen to the thing that, he's gone. So the change will come when they will be looked upon, like cloning, for instance, right? At this point in time, all of this is big scientific news, or, big news, but it will come. I mean, there will be a time when we will, we don't need to shame them, but people would loathe to put this out and say, oh, I bought the latest car out in town, I have 5 cars standing out. I mean, those kind of things will really go. You said conspicuous consumption. It is likely to go away. I mean, and it can't happen in overnight, because there is a section of society that looks on these things and, oh God, he's built a bigger house and a bigger house and a bigger house. There is somebody who talks about, and you spoke about economics, and all those theories did not take into consideration the degradation of the planet. Now, if you put a price to it and then do your math, and then let the economists come and tell me that, when you compare the degradation that has happened to the environment against the development, things like that, it's still the development that wins over this. I'm willing to agree. You haven't even looked at one parameter, completely ignored one. It is, we're only looking at one bit, one part of it. I think more and more look at that.
Right.
It was not even of any interest to me. I mean, because to do what? I mean, there's so many people dying of hunger here, and you want to go. I mean, it's just not even of any consequence to me. So that's how worldview will have to change towards things like this.
Right. Vikram, a question to you. With reuse of clothes or accessories will help in curbing new materials use, but wouldn't it adversely affect smaller artisans and communities working in its production?
No, I don't think so, because it's such a minuscule percentage of the population that would and have been consuming things that are existing and in circulation. In an ideal situation, if that percentage increased even 1,000%, it wouldn't make a difference. It wouldn't nudge the needle much. It would help the world breathe a little better. But there are individuals who would refuse to, buy a used car, let alone used clothes.
Absolutely.
So I don't think that makes any difference. I think the artisans are dying and their businesses are being shuttered because of price wars, because people want things cheaper and quicker. And they want it in copious quantities. And so handloom doesn't afford that. You can't get something made in volume as such. So I've got artisans that we work with and who are generational artisans, who were almost like the first families of Banaras. And they are considering sending their kids away from the looms because it takes too much time and effort, and they have a loss of dignity. They have competition in terms of how much they can charge, and so they just work in the IT industry.
Right.
And so we have crafts dying not because of secondhand, because of overconsumption and quarter-over-quarter growth.
Yeah, and because I think the consumer is so price sensitive that they are not willing to pay, except for the very high end brands, they're not willing to pay for that weaver's labor in a way that would support that weaver's livelihood. And I think that's the other thing, right? You're getting better paying jobs in the IT industry, which is why the weaving community is sending their kids away. I mean, their children also don't want to do it because they think that the reward is just not commensurate to the labor that they have to put in.
Craft after craft is suffering, yeah.
But also, I think it requires dedicated effort from brands themselves. For example, I mean, and this is not a play at marketing, but Payal Khandwala as a brand, we've never gone on sale.
Right.
We used to go on sale. We don't discount our clothes. We don't overproduce. We produce everything in-house. We've lost money in terms of potential profits that we could have made. We've refused to take on investors. It's only because we decided that we want to create a business with values that were therefore, like Srimoyi said, were actually authentic, because it stems from who we are as people. And so if more businesses didn't run after just the bottom line or trying to show numbers where they could raise at a particular valuation, or their real yardstick was only money, things would be very different. And this harks back to, again, what Shoba said. If we look at the traditional ways of how India conducted business and managed to do well, it had longer term plans in mind, and it had long term visions for what they saw their business create. And I think we've become too short term as consumers and as businesses as well.
And this is on all businesses. Same thing happens with travel.
Yeah.
On all these online sites, we are unable to sell on value.
Right.
I mean, a hotel's value is about 25,000 rupees, and it's fastest finger first, the lowest number first. I mean, so unfortunately, you lose out. I mean, everybody loses out.
I see Asad coming back on. Can I quickly throw in two fast questions? And guys, please answer fast so that this thing. One is Joanna Lester George. And sorry if I also didn't cite your name when I was asking the question. I was scrolling through fast. I apologize to any person in the audience who asked a question. I didn't cite their name. But Joanna says she lives in Goa, and she always wanted to access vintage clothing, etc. But the provenance was dubious. Is there a movement, Vikram, towards purchasing in cities vintage, because she can't find it in Goa? And then one last question is, sorry, I'll just find that. What words would you spread to a new small town startup working on sustainable clothing? So that also any of you can answer. I guess the first question would go to Vikram.
Well, authenticating something as far as clothing goes is tricky. We've been fortunate to have team members who've been within the industry, who've worked with a number of the designers. So it's a little easier for us. But I do feel that there is enough volume of product where you are going to, in the near future, find more and more companies like Rewear that will offer this service, and it can be authenticated. And I hope that is the case.
Mm-hmm. Words of advice to a small town startup doing sustainable fashion? Any of you?
Yeah, it's a long ride. it's a long journey.
We need a upbeat sort of.
Have lots of Ovaltine and brush.
Just so you know, there's this. I have a dear friend who runs, according to me, one of the most tasteful vintage stores. It's in Moira. He's called Ranji. Let me know and I'll send you the details.
Lovely it is.
It is a delight because of its beautiful textiles and a lot of other vintage finds. So you have a destination right there. I always say that I live in the smallest state with the largest population of concept stores. It's a very dangerous state, actually.
I know.
Okay, Asad, we're handing it back to you.
Thank you, Gayatri. I mean, thank you to the panel for sharing, such wonderful insights on the luxury sector and sustainable fashion. Gayatri, I mean, you're spectacular as always. As she mentioned, we postponed this panel by a few months. And I think, at least for myself, launching this series, 15 months ago has made me more conscious and, made me believe in certain concepts, which I actually I believed in before, but I never practiced it. And, I've been renovating a house and I've been using all these things of upcycling and recycling. And, do we really need all this in our lives? And, I think this is a wonderful session. There were so many interesting insights that were shared. I was making notes because all these words and phrases that you all were pre-loved fashion. I love that one. And, a lot of you all have been, saying things which kind of mindful consumption. Do we need more? Do we need so much more, secondhand versus dirty? And that that brings me to our very next one. I'm sorry to do my Avid plug, but our next session in this series is the age of conscious consumerism. It's a beautiful segue for this series, and I said this series is something we really believe in. And but thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for being part of this discussion. Stay tuned, stay safe, stay happy, and remember that learning never stops. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.